Okay, so hello everyone. Here we are with Andy Grignon. I believe that I spelled right your last name, right, Andy?
You spelled it
He's
right. I don't actually. You did. You said it pretty good.
yeah,
Grignon. So I'm French, right? So it's like a filet, a filet mignon, a filet grignon.
and Andy Grignon then.
Yeah, there you go.
So then perfect. So he's like a serial entrepreneur, has worked in multiple amazing products, especially the first iPhone. That's
Yeah,
one that everyone knows a lot. He worked directly with Steve Jobs, and he has amazing background. So let's give him a short hi to Andy and welcome to this startup entrepreneurial cycle of innovation.
awesome. Looking forward to talking to you.
So yeah, great. So well, let's start a little bit. Like, how was your process of entering to Apple, like, or working directly with Steve Jobs?
Well, so very different questions, I think. So two times, right? I joined initially back in the mid '90s, like '95, kind of time frame. And Steve, there then Apple was definitely your, very like nobody had Macs, back then. And eventually I left. I worked in QuickTime and some stuff like that. I left, and then I came back in 2000. So I was at a startup. Some friends of ours, had approached us at the startup, and they were friends at Apple, and they said, "Can you make your software work, with this thing that we're building?" And so we did. It ended up being the iPod. So we wrote all the software for the initial iPod. And next thing I know, Steve Jobs is on stage, showing this thing off. We didn't get to see any of it, but Steve's on stage showing it off. I was like, oh man, like it seems like an interesting place to go back to. So that's the second time I joined. I was in 2001. I went back because it wasn't a cool place to be. Just to show you how cool it was, my stock options were granted at $8 and change, right? And then Apple is whatever it is now. But it was the days of Michael Dell telling Steve to fold the entire place up and give the money back to their shareholders, right? It wasn't a cool place at all. But for some reason, it just was attracting me back to go back. And so, I wrote a bunch of software for the Mac OS, the original iChat, which was their video conferencing and messaging solution. And I wrote something called, which is little widgety things that kind of fly in. And then we started iPhone. I started to work pretty closely with Steve during the development of iChat. And so Steve had taken a very, kind of intense interest in the early video conferencing product, so iChat AV. We built this little camera that kind of attached to your laptop or your computer or whatever. These are the days before you actually had the cameras and all that stuff built in. And so Steve had a pretty big interest in that. And so kicking off our relationship. And then, of course, that really intensified during the development of iPhone when we first started that.
Okay, great. So let's talk a little bit about your when you were working at Apple. Like,
Yep.
how was how did the company live the innovation? Like everyone sees Apple like as a huge company that launched so many interesting products. Like, how was the innovation in house, like in Apple?
So, what's interesting about that is Apple, as big of a company as it is, right? There's, what is it, 50,000 some odd people there. There's a very small core group that actually generates the products. And Steve, at least that's, when I was there, Steve knew who to listen to on where ideas come from. How do you actually take, what are the good ones to bring to market? Apple, though, is a very opinionated company, and so you have people who all want to, once you establish, okay, we're going to build a new laptop that does this. Anybody can come up with ideas and features that would be a great thing to add to that, right? So, good example, like the throbbing charge light. When you plug a Mac in the early days, it would kind of like show that it was actually charging up. That was just somebody's random idea to throw in, and people liked it. So innovation, from kind of the feature perspective, happens, kind of spread out through the teams. innovation from core product direction comes from a pretty select number of people. And again, back in Steve's day, it was just people who he knew to listen to. Johnny Ive, obviously, is one of them. It took the entire, for iPhone, the entire exec staff, which I wasn't part of, but the exec staff took about, I think, a year to convince Steve that creating a phone was a good idea for Apple. The actual innovation of the actual phone happened, kind of iteratively, but that's how, the core of it at least gets started.
We have an ambulance on your back, I believe.
I know, right? This is, I'm in the the rough section of Newport Beach, California.
So, well,
I mean, that's how it starts. A lot of people, propose ideas through their management chain. To be honest, I'm not sure how it works today. How do you actually create a new product through Apple today? I have no idea how that works, but I knew back in the Steve era, you basically pitched it up through a couple of people that he truly listened to. Tony Fadell, Scott Forstall, Phil Schiller, Johnny Ive. Right? Like that's where it all comes from.
okay, perfect. So, and something that I'm very interested in seeing, because I've asked this question multiple times, and sometimes the majority is the same answer. So,
yeah.
When you were working over there at Apple, did you actually measure the impact that you were these innovations that you were building were going to the impact that your innovations were going to do all over the world beforehand?
No, never. You actually kind of lose sight of that. I spent a lot of time working on iPod after I joined Apple the second time, and you forget. As I would go to our exec staff for iPod, and we would be, at one point I remember, the biggest problem we had was our inability to move enough product physically through the stores. Right, there were lines. And if we only changed the way that they were sold, we could sell more, iPods. And this is back in the heyday of iPod, right? When they were selling, tens and millions of units a week. Have these discussions, you just forget how many people are buying this product and using this thing. It's so abstract, right? It's just like a widget. You create a thing, and now it's an exercise to just sell more of that thing. You don't really think of the fact that every birth of that product, right? You remember debugging it. You remember the very first version of this thing that now has 100 million of them out in the streets. You forget about all that. And when you're actually building a product, you're not really thinking about, hey, if is this going to change the way we listen to music? Or no, you don't do that. No. What you think about though? Is you take quality very seriously, because when you're looking at numbers like that, if only one person out of a small group who are in the product, if one person sees a bug, you have to really take that stuff seriously, because even if it's just 1 out of 1,000, once you kind of scale that up to really big numbers, you've got now how many out of 100 million, right? That becomes a really serious problem. So it does change the way that you tackle quality, and that you think about the kind of the design impact. But we never thought about, certainly when we were doing the phone, we never thought about, you know what, I hope that in 10 years from now, everyone's sitting around the table just staring at the phone and not talking to each other. You don't think about that, of course not, right? You just want to make the best thing that you can make. So and then you make it kind of you make it the way you think it should be built. And so I think that's the way we approached a lot of this.
So interesting. So how is the process, at least your process? Because I know that you have worked in multiple big companies, also
Yep.
on your own startup. So it's
Yep.
different kinds of between small and big companies. That's
Yep.
your background. But how is your process on creating or actually building new products or features for any kind of technology? From the idea to actually launching it, how is it, if you can make it simple?
Well, I don't know that it is simple. I think it's a process more than it is a recipe that you follow, right? Um, some of my like best ideas have come from just hanging out and drinking with friends, and you just start brainstorming. For me, it's the reason why I spend so much time out and talking to people is because I never know where inspiration is going to come from, and I think at the end of the day, we're not trying to invent things, just invent them. We're creating products that address real problems for people, or a real need in the market. None of us, when we iPhone, any of the phones which were state of the art at that time, right? This was back in the days of the Trio, the Palm Trio, and nobody liked that. I mean, well, I didn't. I mean, the business people used it, but it was that or your Nokia or whatever it was, and those weren't great products. When you kind of let yourself imagine what would be a great product, and then you start to kind of sketch it out, and it would do this. It would have really fast, smooth graphics. It had this kind of feature, whatever it would. That's kind of how it starts, and then you have to formalize that. You actually have to create a plan around. I mean, it becomes very unsexy. Like the very early stages of anything it's just pure ideation. It's sky's the limit. Whatever it is you can think and dream, is possible. And then it turns into anything else. It's into work, right? You come up with a plan. So we didn't know how to build a phone. Nobody at Apple building a phone. And more importantly, Steve told us we couldn't hire anybody that knew how to build a phone. So all of a sudden, it turns into this engineering exercise. You can't Google how to build a phone. You have to actually invent it, right? Especially if you can't hire. Then it becomes just straight up engineering, right? Well, a long time ago, somebody like Nokia didn't know how to build a phone either. So they just kind of set out and they built it. Same thing for us, right? You break the problem down. You start to craft a schedule around it. You create, lots of different groups spring into action once you've decided on kind of a general vision. Same startup or big stupid company or anything in between. Startup has the same thing, right? Startups, the last company I did, it was just, we had this idea that we wanted to create, a new platform that allowed regular people to build these really rich experiences. And we didn't sit there like with drinks like, let's make a platform and builders. No, it was nothing like that. It'd be cool. What if I could make a thing that worked on Android and iPhone? Like my phone, my TV, my fridge, like how would I solve that? And so once you start to kind of figure out the genesis kernel of a core idea, then you start to flesh it out with features. What would it look like? And the process of creation into kind of a core feature set because of the schedule, right? Because if you were to just have everything you ever wanted, it would take you forever to ship it, right? So you have to come down with what in the startup world is called the minimum viable product, MVP. Huge set of vision, distill it into kind of the most core part of its existence, because startups specifically, you're testing a new idea, right? You're testing this idea that you've got for it. Do people even want it? It's cool to you and your buddies, but is it actually something that people will pay for? Because at the end of the day, you're in business. So I think that kind of core, and we did this for iPhone as well, right? Once we figured out how to engineer a phone, then it became an exercise of, what's the bare minimum that we can get away with? What's Apple's MVP? The very first iPhone, and it was kind of a joke, right? People love to pick on the fact that it didn't even have copy and paste, right? It didn't have any apps. It didn't have no third-party stuff. You could make phone calls. You could browse the web. You could listen to music. There was a couple of other. This wasn't the product that we have today, and people forget that. And when you look, I think, at every other major launched Twitter, Facebook, think about Uber is actually generally on par with it. But think back to the very early days of some of those products, and you're like, oh yeah, they shipped with a minimum to kind of vet out the idea, and then they piled on features into the things that we know of today.
So, well, you mentioned two things that are kind of like very interesting.
Yeah.
One is the minimum viable product, and the other one is the market fit, right?
Yes.
So, we already spoke a little bit about the minimum viable product, but
Yep.
there's something very interesting that actually no one has been able to give an answer is how do you know when you get into product market fit? Like everyone says, like you won't know when you get there, but actually no one knows. So that's a very challenging thing for any entrepreneur to say, okay, now it's the right moment to actually scale
Yeah.
or actually move forward on the next thing.
Well, and this is, I mean, I don't know that there's a recipe for that, because I think the reason why you haven't gotten a good answer is because every single person I know wings it. Because it's a gamble, right? Startups, you know, what is it, 90%, 95% of startups fail in their first year, right? So when you float an idea out there, a new thing, or not, and so what's the market fit? I mean, it goes back to the whole, I mean, you know, Steve infamously didn't like to ask product based on polling our audience, our customer base, right? It goes back to Henry Ford. If you in transportation, you just end up with a faster, you know, horse and buggy instead of a car, right? Because people naturally are iterative thinkers, and so when you come out with something revolutionary, the whole point of building a startup is to come up with something completely new, a new novel take, a new something, and you can't get that by asking somebody if that's the way, you know, would you be interested in this? No, you actually have to see, will they pay money for it after it's out there? Because sometimes you just need to see and feel and look and work with things before you can actually identify with it. So how do you understand market fit? You know, I'm not an expert in this area, but I'm more of a fan of you know, once you put out that core MVP, there are ways, I think, and we're starting to see this play out. There's A/B testing. There's my thing. It's great, but you know, I don't like this feature. I like that feature, and it's a process more than it is abject, you know, acceptance or rejection. So it's an interesting problem, but I think everybody makes it up. None of us know what we're doing.
Yeah, it's
true, because
interesting.
I don't. I mean, I have no idea what the hell I'm doing, right? Most of the time. You know, if I'm going to go start a new enterprise, I mean, you know what I do know? Smart people. I have a cursory understanding of some markets. But if I'm going to go into something completely brand new, I mean, think about this. So Elon Musk, he goes and starts SpaceX. What the hell does Elon know about launching anything into space, right? He didn't. He knew how to hire smart people. He knew kind of what his vision was. And then he kind of gave control over to the people who knew what the fuck they were doing. And guiding force. And again, what did Apple know about making phones? Nothing. What does Apple know initially about making great laptops? Nothing. Like, you have to invent. And you gotta try it, and then you gotta iterate on it.
That's interesting. Can I ask you something very specific? I believe
Sure.
that your audio is having some issues. It sounds
sorry.
kind of like I don't know if you can talk now. If you can, we can check.
Yeah,
it out.
can you hear me? Can you hear me all right?
Yep, it sounds like with something in like with a small noise, but yeah, it doesn't matter. So we spoke about a little bit about market fit. You mentioned about hiring, but that's another question. So when you're launching a new product, think of it as Apple, like it's a big company. What were the metrics you were actually focused on with like the iPhone or any other product you were actually working on in Apple?
So again, in a big company, there's whole teams of people devoted to measurements and things like that. I'll tell you, and I don't know those people, and I didn't concern myself with any of them. What I was concerned about was the engineering quality, right? The very first thing that we built in was it's all about quality. How many how many drop calls are you getting? How many people are seeing this particular problem? 100,000 people are reporting this, right? Like the metrics are mostly about product quality, not concerned how many units are we selling or things like that. But those functions did exist, and I think in the startup world you have to look at it from that kind of holistic thing. You don't get to have a team of 100 people who are just watching sell through or things like. I mean, you have to do it all. So the metrics I look for are things like it's obviously product quality, just because I'm an engineer, right? If I was more focused in advertising, I'd be looking at efficient are my ad dollars being spent. If I was in marketing, is the message I'm crafting, is it resonating? Or if I just changed it or tweaked it with an A/B test, you know what I mean? Like those are the kinds of things. You as a startup CEO, wear all the hats. And if you're not good at that, people aren't. You have to dive into the things that you're not comfortable with, but you have to kind of supplant that with people who have skills that can.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. So, like,
but me as an
moving
engineer, as an engineer, CEO, my comfort zone, product and build. Me as engineer CEO, it's completely foreign to me to really dive into the marketing message about myself. I have to force myself to care about it. I have to have somebody that knows that area very well and does only focus on that.
Perfect. So related to like culture, I know that it's something very, very important in the valley,
Yep.
and something that we need to like expand a lot here
Yep.
in different countries worldwide. What are the key things that you have seen that are needed to foster an innovative culture?
An innovative culture. Well, you can't. Here's the thing: you can't chain a bunch of people to some desks and just say innovate, right? Make me something new, right? Most people, and like I said earlier, most people are iterative thinkers. They're not, those kind of explosive, visionary ideators, right? There are people who do that really well. What I look for is a mix. When I hire, I'm looking for, and it's a bullshit term, but there are people who, like, I'm an ideas person, right? Honestly, most of those people are full of shit. Ideas are only, we can all come up with crazy ideas. Actually, no, that's not true. We can't all do that. But it turns into an execution game very quickly. And so now, for me, the question asked, which was culture, how do you, once you craft of a product, how do you actually execute on it, not just to the letter, but while you're building it, responding to what's working and what isn't working, right? And that's where having those ideas, people who can also execute, really matter. And if you just, I'm looking around me right now, I've got all these just drab office buildings. I don't know what these people do, but they're not. It's not a place where I would stick my team and say, make me something, right? That's just personally, I need something a little more creative. I need like something a little quirky. Sitting your poolside at a resort, and for me, this is a great place to just sit here and think and come up with a creative idea. If I can actually sit here and I can write code from here, I can have a call, I can have an interview, I can do all this other stuff. I think it's where you provide an environment where people can do their best work while still maintaining creativity. And some people actually, some people are the kind of people that just need to be at a desk in a boring office building. And that's where they do their best work, because that's totally fine. But the culture that you're trying to create is, one size does not fit all. Recognizing that, figuring out what inspires people, what doesn't. Like, my last company, last company, I was at HP, and we had a retention problem. It was Palm. We got acquired by HP, and I would have, so I had several hundred not director in my chain, my team. We would have these. I would have these one-on-ones with people, and nobody would talk. They were all kind of worked up about something, and I couldn't figure out why. And just as a random thing, I put a wine cellar in my office. So my office was right next to a server room, and I had them air conditioning, and it's like super cold. I painted white to like dark brown, some leather couches, glass desk, and then I put a 20-case wine rack on the back wall, and I filled it with a bunch of wine. And so when I had my first like one-on-one after all this was done, it's like 9 in the morning. I was like, pick a bottle. Like let's have a glass of wine at 9 in the morning. And the response I had from that was tremendous. It was because what people were most worked up about was losing the quirkiness that was Palm when we got acquired by HP. And just having like this random thing happen, yeah, have a glass of wine at 9 in the morning. Didn't work for everybody, but it got them to start, thinking that, hey, you know what, we can still be quirky Palm even though we're part of this larger enterprise. And so my advice isn't, go put wine cellars in all your. My advice is think creatively, think about the needs to tap into, what your team is trying to tell you, but isn't. You want to be surrounded by, right? What's the kind of talent you want to be? That you actually want to have. If you guys had your backs against the wall, company, and you needed a creative solution, and you guys, who would be your core group of people? Do you have like 2, 3 people, whatever, that you're with, or so wherever you're comfortable, and then just like brainstorm really crazy ideas to get out of whatever kind of situation you're in. That to me is that cultural fit. How do you find those people? It's a hiring game.
So talking about hiring, that something that is extremely important. What is your typical interview hiring process? Like if I want to work for you, what would it take for me all the steps to pass?
So I think most interviews, at least in Silicon Valley, are bullshit. We are fixated on business, which really, for the engineering side of things. From the artist side of things, it's the equivalent, which is, show me your portfolio of work and I'm going to judge that. And I think it's all bullshit. I think, yeah, of course I want to make sure you know how to code. I'm going to do that by social proof because I very rarely hire somebody that know it all. If they come in off the street, I will actually look through, like, show me examples of your code. Show me on GitHub. Show me something. Show me examples of your work, just so that I know that you've got technical proficiency. Really, what it's coming down to for me, though, is a cultural fit and a right. When I hire management, that can be a little trickier, right? I want to know. So social proof will only get you so far. So I'll ask all sorts of other people about you. I'm going to ask. How good were you? Was Matthias, was he just kind of I don't mind like oh, he screams and yells, but he gets results. Like, okay, I could take that piece of advice, into consideration. Yeah, but what I would actually do is, if I was looking for you for a leadership position, what I would do is, I like to take people out. One of the random things I like to do is fuck with people, and so. I'll take, we'll go out for lunch or dinner or whatever. We'll just talk about some stuff that I know. And usually a place where I know the wait staff really well. And I'll have them mess up your order in some way. You're going to order something, and I want something to go wrong with it on purpose. And then I want to see how you respond to it. I want to see, are you going to say something? Like, you didn't get your side salad, or, the steak cooked, or whatever it is, right? I want to see, are you going to just take it? Are you going to say something? If you do say something, how are you going to say it? Are you going to be very aggressive and treat them bad? Because these are all things from a management perspective. Those are, kind of the traits I'm looking for. That obviously is not something I would do for like an engineer or somebody like that. That's more of a, let's just talk about, one of my engineering tests would be something like, um, it'll be very conversational after we've established that you know what the hell you're doing. I'm gonna be like, what do you do for fun on the weekends? Sir, I like to go skydiving, or I like to do this, or whatever the thing is you're into. Find out that you live and breathe technology, and it's great. You love driving your Tesla. That's awesome. What I want to know is, are you trying to reverse engineer the APIs so that you can hack your Tesla to have it do something interesting and cool? Have you built a little thing while you skydive to record, your whole jump, from certain altitude? Like, I want to hear about those. That's what I'm looking for, because the hyper geek, the person who is just the constant innovator, the constant builder, usually, at least in technology, figures out ways to tie in, their hobby, their passion with their hobby, right? If that makes sense. So for me, your passion should be building innovative new products. Your hobby is things like, mountain biking. And can you, do you innovate? Do you come up with crazy ideas for fun? Not even because you have to, it's your job, but it's because you're tying this passion that you have into a hobby that you like to do. So that would be my test.
So from who you learned the one that you totally messed his like dinner or lunch or whatever, or you just
No, that turned from that actually came from an accidental thing. And it happens to me because I'm a really picky eater. And so pretty much every time I eat like a toddler, right? It's like the most basic food. I don't really like adventurous stuff. So as long as it's like mac and cheese and hot dogs and things like, I'm fine. But if I go out to a nice place, almost every time I order food, it's always custom and it's always messed up. And so I realized that I was like, oh, that's actually really interesting. Like, how do you respond to it? And it's like, it's important to not be an asshole, because I think that shows kind of who you are. For me, it's like, I think it's important to get what you want, but do it in a respectful manner. And I think, right? And I think that kind of extends out to the way we run our teams, right? You didn't deliver on XYZ feature, and I really wanted it, right? That's my side salad I didn't get. This problem out, right? This is, it's not a, you fucked up my side salad. And I think the management style for a lot of people is very about, their managers. It's because they don't really empathize. They don't understand, what's happening. And so I kind of wanted to figure out a way, how do I address that? How do I find that person? Totally random thing, but whatever. It's also a chance for me to just fuck with someone. So I like that.
well, yeah, you can get a lot of people really pissed with that, like extremely. Yeah, at least from if you do it to me, like I would literally hate you. Like
Perfect.
with my food
I love it.
Yeah, it's the worst thing you can actually do to me. Like
That's awesome.
the rest is okay, but food, no, it's not.
No, I got you.
So, related to what you were talking about, like Steve, and also like I really wanted to learn everything. Like, like how was the meetings with him? Like, everyone talks about a specific agenda, or like you want a specific outcome and stuff. Like, how was that all processed? Because everyone sees like when the product
with Steve.
Yeah, we're at Apple in general, but with Steve especially.
Well, those are very different. Those are very different meetings. So at Apple, kind of meeting it is, right? If this is a bug review, and we're just going over kind of where the state of the product is, that's got a very typical format and fashion. And we're just going to run through as many bugs as we can, and there's a process for that. If this is a meeting around like a team check-in, like, pretty often, we'd have like a weekly meeting, just get the team together. And, mixed. A lot of people just found it kind of boring. They run the table, somebody about whatever it is they're working on. But I think a lot of people at Apple just found those as like time wasters, right? It felt like I should tell you what I'm doing so that it justifies my last week here. But I don't really like those. To me, a meeting should, because in general, I hate meetings. I don't, I don't do them. When I do them, I want them to have a purpose, and I want them to be as short as possible. And so I make it with my teams very clear right up front. Like, look, we need to have a meeting about XYZ feature, product, whatever it is we're doing. But it's very focused. It's not just an open-ended, let's just spend an hour in a room together because we feel like we should. This is we got to get resolution on this. And I need all the players who are involved into this thing, either with a clear decision or next steps on how we're going to get to resolution on whatever it is. Meetings to me are about solving problems, not about feeling good and wasting time. So that's my own approach. Steve had an interesting mix on that. Obviously was very valuable, and we did have regular meetings with him pretty often during the OS 10 software days. The meetings we had a weekly hour-long UI review is what it was called, and he gave us 1 hour to go over the features that he was interested in on just the state of the app. So demos, product demos, where are we at? He just wanted to see, get a feel for, ask for, all right, put a build on my machine. So it went from I want a build of iChat to play with, to just show me pages and pages of icons, potential app icons, right? And those are the meetings where those just infuriating. You'd have this meeting with him, and the poor designers, they would show him, 100 different variations of an icon, and he'd say, no, some of that's working. And you didn't ask him, well, what do you like? You didn't do that to him. You just had to go invent others. And or sometimes he would, after a few weeks of that, go back to one of the original things and say, oh yeah, I want that. So those meetings were just random as hell. In the iPhone days, the meetings with Steve were generally updates on where we were, with the product at any one point. Because learned from so I was mentored by a couple of between Steve, John Rubinstein, Tony Fadell, Scott Forstall. I've been mentored by some of the best leaders, technology leaders, and I've learned a bunch of different tactics that work well. And Fadell, who just left Nest, I remember an exec. We had this exec team for an iPod, and he would do his roundtable. He'd be like, "All right, what's going on this?" I was a software guy, and I remember one meeting that we had where. And everyone's like, yeah, it's going well. We had this, whatever. It was only the thumbs up. And he let us go through the whole day. It was 6 of us, 8 of us, whatever it was. He went all around the table. And at the end of it, he just kind of sits back in his chair, arms crossed. And we're going to fucking do this again, except now you're going to tell me the truth. It was whatever just happened was bullshit. Products of consequence. You don't ever go around a table and have everything is just thumbs up. So, I'm churching it out. I'm making it sound nice, but he was really pissed. He was right. We all were just kind of highlighting. We'd gotten to this complacent state where we were all just kind of saying, "Oh, it's all great. I got this," and us for that. And then he went through. He's like, "Now, tell me what's really wrong." And sure enough, the shit came out of the covers, and but allowed us to get to kind of those core problems. So I think that was a really good example of that I've taken to heart. Of I'll let people get away with that once, and then I'll pull something like that. bullshit. Whatever you just said is bullshit. I don't trust anything you guys have just said.
That's actually very interesting. Like, at least here in Latin America, everyone tries to. Uh, I don't think we're companies that are saying like, yes, everything is perfect.
I think that's a
So
common thing. Honestly, I think it's a common thing in big companies to have that kind of an update. I don't think, startups are more dynamic because, you've got issues. Startups always have issues. But big companies where it's really easy to just kind of sit back and, talk about, oh, everything's great. That is a big problem. And I would see that at HP all the time. I would always be, a member of an exec update where everyone's just like, oh, it's great. And in my head, it wasn't my meeting to run, but in my head, I was like, it's bullshit. Right?
yeah, that's actually true. Uh, well, that's maybe because or why a lot of big companies can actually push that much the innovation
Yeah.
compared to startups that are they're actually just moving. They're all the time like in any kind of issue or almost dying. So I believe that's part of like the culture.
Right.
Instead of like a big, you're more like comfortable.
Yeah. Yeah.
So two last questions, and
Hit
then
me.
we will leave you. We have seen a lot of presentations from
Yep.
Steve Jobs.
Yep.
Apple's cool to do a lot of like launching products. We
Mhm.
have seen it before now, and actually, it's still like part of the like how they run the show. But do they do it like internally
Yep.
before like launching it to the world? And if they do
Yes.
it, like how was that?
Again, I can only speak from the Steve days. I don't know how the launches go today, but back in when I was there, uh, Steve would, before every major launch, there was a particular room in Building 3 of Apple. I still remember it. Building 3, top floor. It was a nondescript room. It was just like any other room. No windows, no nothing. And that was the staging room for every keynote that he did. Through like, and we'd all be sitting around on just like regular kind of folding chairs or whatever they had in that room. And we would go through it, and he would he'd have his slide guy there. His marketing at Phil Schiller would be there. Like, and Steve would sit there and watch, and we'd come up with a script. Like, we'd show the kind of the features as they are, how they work, how they don't work. More importantly, and he had this interesting process of kind of first just seeing the state of the world. He'd be working through the script that he wanted, the story that he wanted to tell. He'd be bouncing ideas off, and his slide guy would be there. Like, he'd be like, all right, I want a picture of something here. Like, he'd be like, I want something here, and I want to say this, this, and this. And all the notes are being taken one of these meetings. And then everyone had action items, 100 things or whatever, wherever we were in the process, right? And and then sure enough, the next day when we'd meet, all of them would be done. There's the picture that he wanted. There's this bug fixed. He wants to show that. Oh, we can't make that now, but in a week we can have that. So we all came away with like a very concrete list of stuff, and that's how it would work. And then we would kind of churn, and then all the machines were set up, everything, and the way Apple, I think they still do. Steve had 3 systems set up. Set up, launch, right? So when you our 2-hour kind of mega keynotes, there were backup machines. All the machines were configured, or there were 3 devices of the exact same thing, but every single one of them was set up at a particular spot in the demo. So if anything went wrong, he could switch to machine 2, which was pre-configured for where the demo should be at that particular. He would have his timeline. Not only did he have his timeline all crafted out in his head with the slides and everything, but when demos would go wrong, because they always do, he was able to instantly flip over to he knew exactly the state of each machine and where to go when things went wrong. So that's part of the showman in him. So he had all that really figured out, more so than I think any. I had to learn some of that, but where he's got that messaging really kind of dialed in. What's the story you need to tell? Notice he doesn't have lots of words on his slides unless it's bullet points on feature specs for like a new thing. And even then, everything he put up on stage on a screen was meant to be photographed with him, him in front of us, in front of a big screen. And that photograph should tell the story of whatever it is he's trying to say at that particular moment. Kind of pictures, say more than words kind of a thing. So, he told a really great story, but he rehearsed and rehearsed. We all rehearsed. And so we knew by the time we launched iPhone, we all knew that script backwards and forwards. And we all knew the things to look for if things were going to go sideways. And the fact that he was the stage man, but the fact that he had an army of people in the audience who were all who knew everything he was about to say intimately, what should be on screen, what should be happening next, that should just tell you how much rehearsal went into every launch.
Well, that's very interesting. I don't know if everyone does that, but yeah,
I don't think they do. A lot of people just get up there and wing it, or they'll just make a slide deck and they'll, this looks good and whatever. But he took it to a whole new level.
Well, that's great, actually. So the last question.
Yeah.
What are your key, not outcomes, but focus on building and launching a successful product? If you're giving 3 tips for any startup.
So I do a lot of mentoring and advising startups, and I look at if I'm going to go talk to somebody new, I want to know about the product. So first I start with kind of the high level, the pitch deck, right? So it's the same idea as investing, right? So somebody sends you a deck. You take a look at kind of the high level. What's the thing? What's the product they're trying to create to solve a need in that market? What's the opportunity for that market? And actually, in my opinion, most importantly, who's the team that's in charge of building it? And I can't talk enough about how important a team is to creating, because when you go and you pitch your company, right? You want $1 million to go build XYZ thing. That for me, unless I know that the team is that you have or you particularly are a rock star. Because what happens after you cut the check for $1 million, that money's gone, right? It's a bet you've made. This company or this person is going to go and do something great. Then is things are going to go sideways. Somebody's going to beat you to the punch. Somebody's going to the market's going to evaporate. Whatever it is, what happens then to your money? Well, smart people will pivot. Right? They're going to change. They're going to adapt. Or the gamble that they took initially it didn't pay off. It wasn't the right solution. How do you adapt? How do you create something new? If I just put $1 million bet on that you're making a new ring or whatever it is, and all of a sudden that market goes away, well, shit, if you and a bunch of those were in charge of building that, well, I guess that's that. I know that you guys have this 100%, and you know what? Maybe rings weren't it, but if we were to really get creative and think about it, we believe earrings could be a new thing. Whatever, totally fictitious, whatever example, but I believe first on the team, and then the strategy for the product that you're kind of going to market to. So my 3 tips, I guess, is 100% where it's at, and that's always paid off for me in terms of thing as part of a big company, startup or anything else, it's all focused on the team. So that's my first bit. My second bit would be money. You're not going to go anywhere. So what's your plan? I mean, it is money. One can, is independently wealthy, which never happens. What's the plan to make sure that people are being engaged? And not the trickier thing, right? It's specific to start. That goes back to storytelling to tell and the product. Now, you have to grade because the story funds the idea, which gets you the company. When I was doing my last company, getting my first million was really easy. With my background and all that, you just roll out of bed and here's $1 million. I understand that's not everybody has that experience, but after I spent that $1 million, I needed more. I wanted a couple more million. And what I did was I pitched a bunch of investors in Silicon Valley. I probably pitched 50, 100 times. I don't know, a lot of times. I saw everybody. And I'd go in kind of cocky. I'd be like, oh, we got this thing. This is kind of where we're at. It does this, this, and this. Here's all the data, market opportunity, blah, blah, blah. And you can just wire me the money. It's cool. However you want to do this. And every single person said no. Every single person. Because I wasn't telling a good story. And story that mattered. No kidding. I spent 2 weeks coming up with a real story. I neglected one of the most fundamental things in storytelling. And as soon as I told the story, my pitch every other startup, right? I had my PowerPoint deck, all my whatever, and I got rid of the whole thing. My pitch included, like, I printed it. It was appropriate to our product that we're making, but my pitch was a deck of cards, and I basically card game, and I told a story while I was doing it. It was totally non-traditional, very different. That told our story. It was a nice hardcover book, gorgeous photography, that told the story. And I left, for people who were really serious, I could tell, I left it with them. And it was a coffee table book. And guess what? The very first time I gave that pitch, my lead investor was the one who picked up on it right after that. So that, it was such a night and day difference, where I saw success only because I told a different story. So, and I think that's a hugely important thing. And the books I made, actually, they were gorgeous books. It was kind of a gimmick, but think about it this way. Since money does make, everything kind of turn, it's really important to secure that. That's the lifeblood of your business. And if you're not generating revenue, then you have to have it from outside sources. So, so the story is really important. But then also, that story that you craft for investors is the same thing that helps you get talent, right? You're going to tell a version of that story if you really passionately believe in it. You're going to tell a version of that story to new employees, right? So your family and friends or whatever it is. So there you go. There's another tip.
Perfect. Thank you so much for this call. We really appreciate it, and hopefully invite you soon to another one.
Man.
So I'll just stop the recording now.
All right.